It's time to rough out some bowls. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to rough turn a bowl blank. Now this is a piece of green oak. That means it has a lot of moisture in it still. That's what the green aspect has to do with the name. And it's actually white oak, but it's green in that it has moisture in it. Hope that was clear. What I've done is I've split this log in half. If you want to know more about how to split a log, check out this video. And be sure to check out my course. I have an online course all about understanding green wood. In that course, we go into great depth and we thoroughly cover everything you need to know to process raw wood like this. And you're really going to check that out. It's way more than we can cover in one video here. But today what we're going to be doing is rough turning this into a rough bowl so that we can allow it to dry and then bring it back to the lathe later for its twice turning. Once we've done that, then we've allowed the piece to do all of its contracting and warping and shaping in this first rough turning. So we're going to rough turn it, set it aside, and let it do its shaping. It's going to contract in the center and the pith ends are going to push out a little bit. And after a period of time, it's going to equalize. Wood is never dry, it's only equalized, meaning it's equalized to its environment. I live in a very hot, humid environment, and the wood here contains more moisture than wood perhaps in the desert environment, which will have almost no moisture in it, but it will still have moisture in it. This goes for super old furniture, by the way. Like if you had a piece of 100-year-old a table, let's say, that your grandmother gave you, it has moisture in the wood, believe it or not. And it is all based on your environment and the outside humidity and the temperature around you. So keep that in mind. But what we're doing is we're working this bowl blank down so that we can allow it to do its shaping and warping and then put it back on the lathe and turn it true again. And because we've already done this rough turning and we've allowed it to dry, by the time we turn it a second time, it's going to stay true and round, and it's going to have a beautiful presence. So we don't have to worry about the sides pulling in or getting a little wonky over time. That won't happen if we go through these steps. So today I'm going to show you how I rough out a bowl blank. Let's go ahead and get this on the lathe and get started. Because this blank is so large and heavy, I'm going to use a faceplate to attach it to the lathe. Faceplate is the best way to deal with a large blank of this size. What I do is I'll line this up with the center. I measure to find the center of this blank, and then I will start one screw and then tighten the second screw. If you tighten that first screw, what will happen is it will torque and move the faceplate. So start the first one, tighten the second one, and then go back to that. And then I'll put in about 3 screws per section. There's going to be about 9 screws holding this. When I attach this to the lathe, I want to hold the blank secure and not let it hang on the headstock, and I want to turn the headstock spindle to attach it. Basically, you don't ever want to take the bowl blank and twist it onto the headstock because there's a good chance, because of the weight of the blank, that you could strip the threads of the headstock. Obviously, we don't want that. So there's a corner of this that's sticking out, and I need to bring that corner down before I can get the tool rest up closer. I'm applying a lot of downforce with my left hand on the tool rest. Essentially, the entire blank is going around, and the only thing that's hitting the bowl gouge is that one section that's sticking out a bit. So with it removed a bit, I can bring the tool rest up. When you start off with the corners of a blank, a large blank like this is basically the only way you can do it. You have to stop frequently and keep moving that tool rest up so you have good support. I'm pointing the nose of the bowl gouge in the direction of the cut and applying down force with my left hand. Now, if you had a chance to see the video I made about stop getting beaten up by your bowl blanks, everything from that video applies to what I'm doing right now. You might want to check that one out after this video. If you've ever had a large bowl blank like this and gotten beaten around, you know what I'm talking about. You definitely don't want that because it will fatigue your hands and your arms and your shoulders, and it'll just wear you out. Instead, you want to use your body and your leverage to make the best cut without getting beaten up. So I'm just going to keep working the corner, the outside round portion of the bowl down. I'm going to remove all of this bark. Now, roughing it's actually pretty straightforward. We're just roughing out a shape here. I'm not worried about making a smooth surface. I'm not really worried about making a perfect shape of any sort. I just want to make sure there's enough material there and the walls for that material are evenly thick. The even thickness of the walls is really important for drying. If I have an area where there's a thin wall and then a very thick section, that thick section is going to dry at a different pace, and the two areas are going to create tension and crack. You can see how by applying down force with my left hand, I'm keeping the bowl gouge in line with the cut. I'm just letting it track along the tool rest and not get beaten around by the bowl blank. Definitely don't want to push the bowl gouge into the bowl blank. That's where the surface of the bowl will force the bowl gouge to bounce around, and we definitely don't want that. I'm going to make a face cut here and expose the area where the tenon and the shoulder will be. I need to get this bark out of the way. Now this is a laurel oak, I believe. I'm not 100% on that. I know it's in the white oak family. White oak trees are very difficult to identify many times. They can look similar to one another, the leaves can be similar, but yet the wood inside the tree can appear different. And from what I understand, white oaks can cross. So there are actually many, many varieties of white oak trees and many sub-hybrid varieties of oak trees. So you might not always get exactly what you think you're going to be getting when it comes to a white oak tree. So far, this species and the turnings that I've had from this have been pretty nice. I'm hoping that it will dry relatively even and give me the ability to make some really nice twice turn bowls. That's the other thing with rough turning is because you can do it relatively quickly, it's not a major investment of time. So if something does happen and this piece does crack apart, I'm not super worried about it. And it's also why I'm going to do many of these. I'm going to do about 8 or 10 of these today. Now I'm using my dividers to measure the width of the 4-jaw chuck that I'm going to be using, and I'm going to be a little bit lenient. I'm going to make it larger. I'm going to be opening the jaws a little bit more than I really would want to typically. The reason for that is the tenon will also distort as the bowl distorts. So the tenon is going to become oval shaped instead of round. So when I put this back on the lathe later when it's dried or equalized, I will have to true up the tenon first. And I need to have enough material there so that when I true it up and take off the high spots, it will still fit inside the 4-jaw chuck. So I'm shaping the tenon cylinder and the shoulder. And this will become the base of the bowl. And then we just simply need to connect it with the top rim of the bowl. The other great thing about rough turning green wood is the fact that the moisture content in the bowl is so easy to turn. Once this oak dries completely, it's going to be a completely different turning experience. It will be very hard and very dense. It's not impossible to turn. It simply requires a lot more sharpening, and it requires taking smaller bites or smaller cuts as we make each pass. So the same rounding that I'm doing right here that you can see in the profile that I can do very quickly here when the wood is wet will take me probably 4 or 5 times longer when that wood is completely dried. It's another reason why we really don't want to turn dried wood. Even if you could get a chunk of wood like this to be dry completely, you really wouldn't want to be turning that because it's going to be a lot of work. With most of the work done by shaping it here, the only thing we're doing is just revealing the final shape when we twice turn it. We'll only be taking down a few thin layers of that nice dried wood, and then we'll reveal the bowl that's inside. Now I've got a knot up here that's starting to split. I'm probably going to take that surface down below that right now, or the top rim of the bowl. I'll take it down below that because that's probably going to be problematic. I'm going to clean up the sides of the bowl here by making a perpendicular cut across the end grain. Now I'm not getting a really smooth cut here. That means I'm still cutting air. There's some high spots and low spots on this blank. This pass and the next pass will help true that up, and I can get the lathe speed a little bit faster since it's more balanced. So essentially, green wood is really easy and fun to turn. Plus, you don't have to sharpen your tools as much. There's that flat spot that was creating the air gap. Trying to feel how deep I need to go until I have a continuous cut. When I have a continuous cut, I know that I'm turning everything here and I'm turning away that flat spot. If I hear any kind of clicking or any kind of tapping sound, it's that flat spot sneaking underneath the bowl gouge and then the gouge reconnecting with the opposite side. As soon as you have a nice solid cut with no interruptions, then you know that you're removed all of the flat spots. I'm just going to do a quick pull cut here to round that off a bit. Again, we're not getting fancy with this. You can see all the tool marks and the lines. I'm going to take the top rim of this bowl down to see what it's going to look like. Just making a very delicate push cut using the bottom wing. I want to see where we have a nice even surface. Sometimes the top surface is a little wonky and we need to even that out. And I still have that knot or pith area there. I'm going to take this down a little bit more. I know that knot will be problematic up on the rim like that. So I'll bring that down just a touch. Okay, that's better. There's a crack there, but that can be filled and that won't be so bad. Now there's a high spot here. My only concern with this is I want this to appear more rounded. So there's kind of a thick spot there, like almost like a corner. So I'm going to round this off just a touch more before I finish up the exterior. Just make a quick push cut. And that'll make a scraping cut to kind of round those off. Okay, I like that shape much better. Now, we aren't doing the final shape, obviously, but we kind of want to get it in the ballpark so it's easy to get that shape later. Now, I'm going to use my spindle detail gouge and just take a little tip off the center here. That's going to make it easy for me to line this back up on the lathe with the tailstock. And I can find the center really quick that way. I'm going to clean up the tenon and create the dovetail angle for the 4-jaw chuck. All right, so the exterior of this bowl has been roughed out. We're not going to take any time to sand this or try to make the tool marks nice and smooth. They're fine just like this. Again, this is just roughing out, so we don't have to be super picky, which is nice. So we'll take the faceplate off. We won't need that anymore. And then I'll bring the 4-jaw chuck in and we'll get this mounted. Again, you don't want to twirl the chuck on the headstock. That's how threads can get damaged. You turn the handle, the headstock handle, spindle handle, and that you'll know immediately if you have a bad connection there. You'll feel it and you can readjust. Now I'm going to bring the tailstock up for some added support for these first few passes. I'm going to remove that high layer in the center. And with the tailstock there, I can get a little bit more aggressive. I don't have to worry about this popping out of the four-jaw chuck. That rarely happens. It can happen, but very rarely does that happen. You can see the moisture content in this wood. The area that I'm cutting is very wet compared to the surrounding rim that I cut just a little while ago, which dried out. And that also is a great example of how the surface of the wood can dry very quickly. We have to be careful because if we have thick areas of the bowl, with the outside of the bowl drying quickly and the inside maintaining moisture, that creates tension and that makes it really easy for the bowl to crack. So we want to try to maintain this evenly, and one of the ways we're going to do that is once I'm done turning this and cleaning out the inside, is I will coat the end grain fibers with Anchor Seal. Now Anchor Seal is a paint wax sealer that seals up the end grains and prevents them from losing moisture as fast as they would if they were just exposed to the air alone. And the reason we want that is we want the end grain and the side grain to reduce their moisture content evenly. That way the whole bowl will become equalized in an even fashion. If the end grain dries super fast and the side grain is still wet, again, we have that contrast and that conflict, and that will cause cracking. As you can see, I'm using a method of clearing out the bowl that's a little different than what I usually do. And I forgot to do something here. I need to measure the wall thickness. First of all, I'm going to measure this. This is about 12 inches or 30 centimeters wide. So I'm going to make that 10%. That's about 1.25 inches or about 3 centimeters. And I'm going to make a line there. That's going to be my wall thickness, the outside of that. So I need to remove the material on the inside. Now getting back to what I was mentioning, I'm scooping out from the center out, which I don't normally do. But because this bowl will have such thick walls, I really don't have to worry about it flexing or moving around at all. And we have a nice, smooth, round, flat top surface, unlike a live edge or natural edge bowl. So I'm going to just do scoop after scoop. Now, that being said, I'm still keeping my body upright and I'm looking down on the entire bowl. I'm looking at the shape that I'm cutting inside as a little miniature version of the outside exterior of the bowl. I'm being very careful not to go too deep into the bowl before I make my turn, or not deeper than the outside of the bowl appears to be. I'm trying to match the exterior of the bowl with each pass that I make on the interior. I'm starting each cut with the bowl gouge flute close to being closed at 90 degrees. That will prevent the gouge from skipping backwards. So it's almost 90, and then you can see I'm rotating it open. When it opens up like that, it becomes more aggressive and can cut a little bit deeper. And then as I reach the center of the bowl, I go back and close the flute to the 90-degree position. So almost 90 there. Now I'm rotating it counterclockwise and opening it up. And as I get to the center, I will close it back down again. You want to keep that tool rest nice and close so you have plenty of support. Just take your time and make each pass nice and smooth. Again, look down. I'm looking down at the exterior of the bowl and making sure the path I'm moving on and the shape that I'm making matches the exterior of the bowl. I've gone back to the sharpening station and sharpened my gouge 2 or 3 times during this turning process. If this were dry wood or equalized wood, I would have probably needed to sharpen 20 to 30 times by now, easily. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. You just need to know that if you have a large piece of dried wood, it's just going to take a little bit longer and you need to sharpen more frequently. You have to have sharp tools. Basically for any turning, you have to have sharp tools. I'm going to measure the thickness here. I'm getting about 3 fingers down on the end there, and it's 3 fingers in the bottom. So I'm very fortunate here. I've got the wall thickness is pretty consistent throughout, from the sides down to the bottom. I'm trying to take off the same amount of material from the inside wall as I am at the bottom. Now there's a knot that is right in the bottom of this bowl, and it's preventing me from getting a nice clean cut across the bottom. The knots are usually much denser because you're turning against the perpendicular against the grain of the branch. That's basically what a knot is a branch growing out of the tree. And in this particular position, I'm cutting through side grain, but then I'm cutting through end grain right where that knot is, so it makes it a little more difficult. I need to reach in there a little bit deeper with my tool rest and get more support. So I'm going to use my J tool rest. This is a bit longer and can get down in there and support the bowl gouge just a bit more. I got a little too deep with that cut. So what I just did, I don't know if you noticed, I backed up and reduced the thickness of the cut. And then I'll come back and do another cut to make that the final cut here. If you make a cut that's too deep, you'll notice it. You'll see the bowl gouge is struggling and it's not doing such a great job. Go back and make the cut a little bit thinner and see how your gouge does. Now, these are all roughing cuts. I'm just ripping material out of here. I'm not trying to make this smooth or make it look nice. Smooth finishing cuts are very light, and they only remove just a small amount of material with each pass, especially right down to the very finished edge or the finished surface. You want to make very light passes, and it's almost like shaving the top surface with finishing cuts. These are roughing cuts. I'm just ripping material out and just getting to the shape that I need as quick as possible. All right, I'm going to check thickness again. I'm down to 2 fingers. And 2 fingers across the side and the bottom. All right, fantastic. And that's it. Now I'm going to deal with that crack along the rim. I don't want that to open up any more than it already has. So what I can do with that is just put a little wood glue in there. Yeah, I happen to have some in my back pocket. I was planning for this moment. So basically place some wood glue in there and then push it down into the crack, but it'll also, many times it'll just fill in naturally on its own down into the crack. And if that space right there becomes opened up because the glue has gone out, then I'll apply more glue to it later. This is just to help hold this piece in as the wood moves, and it prevents it from cracking anymore. So there's a bowl blank. It's not pretty. It doesn't have a perfectly smooth surface, but this blank will become a beautiful bowl after it's dried and equalized. Okay, hopefully you can see how easy it is to rough out a bowl. The nice thing about roughing out a bowl is we're not super worried about the overall shape, the overall finish of the surface, any of that, because we're going to address all of it later in the final turning. Instead, what we want to do is we want to make sure we have the right wall thickness, and that wall thickness is important because what happens when these sides pull in, we want to make sure there's enough material in here to have a complete true circle when we go back to turn it again. If we made this really thin right now and these walls pull in and this becomes an oval, well, if we put it back on the lathe and try to turn a circle, we're just going to remove the high spots and we're going to not be left with a circle. Hopefully that makes sense. Now this piece was coated. I coat this with Anchor Seal. I have a link to Anchor Seal and everything that I use in this video in the description below the video, so check that out. Anchor Seal is a latex flexible sealer that goes on white, but then it dries clear. I've done several of these today and I've gone ahead and sealed these, and when it dries you don't see it so much, you can feel it. It's kind of a waxy surface. It's important that it coats the ingrain fibers. The ingrain fibers are kind of like straws. Those straws ends are down here, the sides of the straws are over here. The sides we're not so worried about because they're not going to leak out moisture as much as the ingrain will. The ingrain leaks out moisture dramatically, so we need to make sure that's sealed well. So I sealed the ingrain on the outside and the inside. I go all across the inside and I go across the bottom and get the bottom tenon and any of the sides where the ingrain's exposed. I seal all of those. And what that's doing is it's keeping what moisture is in the wood in it, and it's not letting a whole bunch drain out on the ingrain while there's still moisture in the sides. Remember, when we have uneven moisture content in the wood, that's when there's going to become tension. If the sides are holding a lot of moisture but the ingrain is dried out completely, then this is going to want to crack compared to the side grain. So instead, by sealing this, we kind of trap all the moisture that's in there and we let it slowly escape over time in an even manner, and this is going to help prevent cracking. That's why we want to seal that. Remember, rough turning is not super complicated. It's a great idea to get a bunch of these turned and just put them away. I hear this from a lot of people. They say, well, I don't want to have to wait that long. How long does it take? Well, the rule of thumb is a year of drying time per inch of wall thickness. Well, this one has almost 1.5 inches wall thickness. That means I got to wait 1.5 years. Well, here's the secret. Turn a whole bunch of these and then go do some once turnings. Once turning meaning just turn a bowl, and if it moves a little bit, then so what? That's fine. Get some other wood species, just keep turning. Turn a whole bunch of these, put them on a shelf somewhere, forget about them, and make sure you're dating the bottom of these. Put the date and the wood species on the bottom of them, because you'll be surprised over time when they get covered with dust and all kinds of debris, it may be hard to even tell what the wood species is, let alone when you put it up there on the shelf. But what I'm getting at here is you'll be surprised how fast time goes by, and you'll go back to the shelf and you'll see bowl blanks sitting up there that were put up there 2 or 3 years ago, and you'll think, oh, that wasn't so bad. And you can pop them off the shelf, put them back on the lathe, and have a nice, beautiful finished bowl. So the secret to get over the problem of this is going to take too long is just to turn a whole bunch of bowls and you won't really remember. That's what I find, at least. Turn a whole bunch of them, you won't have a problem. All right, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, click that like button, please. I greatly appreciate you doing that. Thank you. Leave me a comment below. Let me know if you rough turn bowls so that they can later be twice turned. And if you don't, let me know if this video helped convince you to maybe try that next time. And be sure to check out my website, turnawoodbowl.com. Over there, I have everything you want to know about turning wood bowls. turnawoodbowl.com. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. And as always, happy turning.